Welcome to the last video for the Code With Me videos for Chapter 12. In this video, we're going to be covering activities 1215 through 1222. The first thing we're going to do is still working on our box model in CSS file. So we're going to go into the body rule at the very top and add a background image. So we have background color. Next, we're going to say background image. And the image we're going to locate, first thing you need to do is say URL and parentheses. And then again, I like to add the double quotes just in case you have a space in the actual URL. 2 periods, which means we're going to back out of our current folder where the CSS file is. We're going to go into our images folder. We're going to select boxes.gif and close with a semicolon. Save your changes, refresh your browser, and you'll notice that the background has now changed from the nice little soft yellow to this kind of psychedelic block item, which is okay. It covers up the background, and the background image, even though it's only one box, come on, it's one box with many boxes inside of it, is repeated down and to the right and continues until the end of time. So if we resize the browser, you'll see that the background itself stays perfectly still and just repeats from the top left corner. What we're going to do is we're actually going to limit how much that repeats by saying background repeat. And the few options here are no repeat, which means that it's only going to display once and only once. We still have the background color set up, but in this case, now we only have one image, in this case, a box, that shows up once and does not repeat. If we change no repeat to repeat X, that means it's going to repeat along the X-axis, otherwise known as the horizontal axis. In most browsers, since we haven't defined where the position is, it's going to be the top row of the actual browser. If we say repeat Y, that means it's going to repeat down the vertical axis or the left column. And that's all fun and games. Let's just go back and say no repeats, so we can play with it a little more. Okay, there we go. So now we're going to go into the H2 and we're going to add a background image for it as well. Now since background BA starts before BO, we're going to add it as a first element or first property. So background image URL, and again I like to add double quotes. You don't have to, but I just like to play it safe. 2 periods, images, and then we're going to say icon.png. Alright, save, and you'll notice that the H2 now has a repeating background of this kind of wavy block. Technically, it's just one image. We take a look at brackets, and it is just a cube. But because it repeats across the top and the left, and until the end of time, it's going to keep repeating as long as there is space to fill it up. Going to set this also to background repeat, no repeat. Save, refresh, and now it's just set in the top left. Going to add one more declaration to the H2 for padding. I'm going to modify the padding. We're going to add padding left to 30 pixels, mainly to space away the background from the left border. That didn't do exactly what we wanted, but it does add more space. It's H2. H2? Yep, H2. My bad. Not the H1. H2. There we go. Okay, that makes more sense now. So now once we add the padding left of 30 pixels, now you'd notice that the content itself spaces itself away from the actual background. We're basically making a placeholder for the far left so that the background can appear and then the content can be displayed next to it. Alright, the next activity, we're going to be adding the background position. And background P works before background R, so background position, and in this case we're going to give it two values, 100px and 25px. That basically means that it's going to appear to move 100 pixels over and 25 pixels down from its default position. So we save, we refresh, and now it appears right there. If we change this to, instead of 100 pixels and 25, if we say 50% and 10%, that does the exact same thing, but with 50% and 10. So 50% from the left and 10% down. So it should be somewhere around here. Am I right? Sort of. That was close. Now the background appears horizontally centered and down 10% from the page's height from the top of the page. If you don't see the image, it may be hiding behind the image graphic. In that case, resize your browser until you see the image. Return to brackets, and we're going to modify it with some keywords now instead of values, or instead of numerical values. In this case, we're going to say right and center, which basically means that we're going to place it on the right-hand side and in the center of the actual page height. So a nice little blocky thing right here. If you decrease the page content size, you'll see that it actually moves position as well. If we increase it, it goes down because everything's getting much taller once we increase the size, and smaller once we decrease the size. Okay, return to brackets and edit, and both edit the background repeats. That's odd writing. Declarations to tile the image across the bottom of the page. So background position, bottom, and repeat X. So now, since we have stated where the background will start or is positioned, I'm going to comment out the repeat so we can see where it is. Now, if you don't have anything else, you may notice that the graphic itself just repeats forever. But what's actually happening is that we have placed it at the very bottom. So if we say no repeat, go back to the browser, you'll see it specifically starts at the bottom and also starts in the center. Mainly because if we say bottom left, it's going to place it on the bottom left. But if you say nothing in the second, it's going to assume the center. So now if we say repeat X, that means it's going to repeat across the X-axis, in which case, where it is, left and right. Look at that. All right. Return to brackets, and, well, that's a lot of good. So we're going to actually delete that for what we're doing because the activity says so. And we're going to say background repeat, no repeat. So basically we're back to quite literally square one. Okay. Oh, that's what we're doing. We're modifying the size. All right. So in the body, come here, body. I'm going to say background size, and we're going to say cover. Now, if you recall from the lecture, the picture of Paris, what cover is going to do is it's actually going to stretch this image to the far width of the browser. So if we save, we refresh, and now we have one big gigantic image. Well, that's good because now the width that the browser is providing allows us to have a full size of the image. Well, the image is quite small, so therefore we kind of don't get the full effect. It looks a little blurry. If we change cover to contain, what's going to happen is instead of the left and right proportions, it's going to try to contain the image in the available space using the top and bottom aspects. So, because we said contain, it's at the bottom, at the very bottom of the page, in the top as well. We still have some extra space on the side, but that's only because it tried to contain the actual image. Since the browser itself is technically a bit taller than it is wider, it is able to contain the whole image in the available space versus the long width that we had before. Okay, that's all fun and games. Return to brackets and delete the background size and background repeat from the body. So the background image displays at its actual size now and should tile across the page, which it does, and it's a bit of an eyesore. The next activity, 12:18, we're going to say background attachment. So background attachment starts before C, so we're going to say background attachment. And for this, we're going to say fixed. Now what this means is that the background itself will stay in one place instead of scrolling with us. Now when I say stay in one place, what I mean is that once we scroll, the background will stay exactly where it is versus going with the text and scrolling with us. So we save, we refresh, and visually there's no difference. But once you start to scroll, you'll notice that, hey, the background doesn't move, but the text does. So this way, you can actually have the background fixed to a scroll, so that way, no matter how far the person scrolls, the background will stay in one place. And now we're going to get rid of that. Fill in the blank. There we go. Next is we're going to shorten it to just background. So in this case, we're going to say, going to delete the background color, going to delete image, and just leave it as background. After that, we're going to say repeat Y and say right. So we indicate the repeat in the position property. So we save, we refresh, and now we have it going down the right side because it is starting in the center and going up and down, repeating in the Y axis or the column. And this one we do not delete. Good. But we are going to edit it. Okay, so backgrounds, we're going to add a second background. And this one's going to go before our boxes. URL, images, and it's going to be screen. And we're going to separate the new one with a comma. I'm going to make it a new line, make it easier to read. Going to save, and we're going to refresh. So now the new screen background is visible, but because it was listed first, it is at the top of the stack and covers up the background strip on the right side of the page. We need to reverse the order so that the strip can be seen on top of this screen. So let's take this right here. I'm going to cut it, back that up a line, comma before the semicolon, and paste that. So we save, we refresh, and now we have the screen, and now we have the boxes. Okay, so the screen image is now displayed on the box strip on the right. Both background images are visible. In the next step, we'll add a third background image and break up the code to span multiple lines for readability. So we have the boxes that we're repeating Y. We're actually going to be repeating the Y as well, so it's going to be on the left and the right. So what we can do is we can actually just copy this right here. We can paste a new one, comma, and we can just get rid of the right portion because we want this to be on the left. So we save, we refresh, and hey, look at that. We have 3 backgrounds, 2 of which are the same, but in different positions, and we have a screen in the back. Technically, one thing you could do is instead of saying right, you can say right top. So that way, the left one and the right one start in the same place. Otherwise, your right one's going to start in the center of the page, and in this case, the center height, and go up and down, getting this kind of 10% portion right here. I'm going to add top just to make things a little more visually appealing. Okay, so the content inside the div is difficult to read because the background is so busy. Well, that is true because, well, the content's hard to read. So we're going to go back to the div, and we're going to say background color and make it basic white. You could also say RGB 255, 255, 255, or RGB 100%, 100%, 100%, or anything else, or you can just say F and therefore it's white. So save, refresh, and now everything inside the div is easier to read in contrast to the screen in the background. Alright, next we're going to be comparing opacity to RGBA. This is a good example of when to use and when not to use the opacity rule. A lot of students and a lot of people think that whenever you need to apply a transparent background, opacity is the answer. Opacity is an answer, but it's not the answer if you just want a transparent background. Let me show you what the difference is. So in the div, just because I'll be deleting this later, we're going to say opacity, and we're going to say 0.5 because opacity has a value between 0 and 1, so it's a decimal value. If we save, we go to the browser, we refresh, you notice that the screen, the background, shows through the actual content. That's because by setting the div to an opacity of 0.5 or 50%, everything inside of the div is now 50% transparent, including all the text, the images, the links, and everything else. If we say 1% 10% of having opacity, that means that basically everything inside the div, even though it's still there, is very hard to read because the opacity level is so low. If we set it to 90%, it's a bit easier to read, but if you look very closely, you can still see the background poking through. So, even though opacity has its benefits, if you just want a transparent background, opacity is not the answer. Instead, let's get rid of opacity and make it a transparent background. Unfortunately, hex code does not support transparent backgrounds, so we can't use hex. We have to use RGB, but not just RGB alone, RGBA. With RGB, we have the 255, 255, 255 for white, and then inside of that, we're going to use the same 0.5 value for 50%. We save, we refresh, and now we have a transparent background, but all the content is still full and visible, including the images, the links, and everything else. Let's increase that just a bit to 90% or 0.9. And now we can see that we have a transparent or semi-transparent background. The screen still pokes through a bit, but the content is still visible and is not faded whatsoever, which is very, very beneficial versus opacity. All right, for the last activity, we're going to be dealing with box shadows. So for the H1 up here, we're actually going to be adding a background color. Background color of F. And that's perfectly fine for what we need to do. And you can tell the difference between the 0.9 transparency for the alpha layer and the white background for the H1. And as the background does not need to be translucent, we can use hex instead of RGBA. So we're going to add a drop shadow to the H1 element by adding a box shadow to the H1 rule. We need to be sure this declaration is placed after border radius to keep the declarations alphabetized. So border radius right here, going to say box shadow. And again, this follows the same rules as text shadow. So we have our X of 3px, Y of 3px, our blur radius of 5px, and we can use hex code 333 to make it work. So if you save, you refresh, you now see that the H1 has a nice shadow around the edges. Trust me, prior to CSS3 and all the things that we're learning right now, in order to achieve this, it would take a bunch of image editing and then a bunch of image loading just to get this effect. Now the browser does 90% of the work. Well, a right and down box shadow is nice, but what we can do is we can actually we're adding a glow around the div. So in this case, we're going to go to the div. We're going to say box shadow, box comes after border. And we're going to say X and Y have 0, so therefore we have a glow, 20 pixels to make it nice and visible, and then 333 once more. So we save, we refresh, and now the div has a nice, soft, semi-transparent glow around it. The H1 has a nice box shadow around it that follows the border radius. So no matter how much border radius this has, whether it's the nice curve right here or the sharp curves on the right, it gives you a good idea about how it actually follows and is pre-calculated based on the browser. Okay, that is everything for Chapter 12. I know it was quite a lot of information between the colors, the comments, the box model, and the backgrounds, but this is still the tip of the iceberg. We still have 4 chapters left to deal with CSS. So if you have any questions regarding Chapter 12, anything at all, please let me know in an email with your file so I can help diagnose the problem, or you can hit me up on Twitter and I can help you walk through the problem itself. Until then, please start working on your assignment. If you have any questions about anything, please let me know so I can help walk you through it.